Okay, so welcome everybody. I hope you're all doing well. This is the October IGRI Research Seminar. For those of you who are new, we host these meetings once a month on this first Tuesday from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern. My name is Ute Brady. I'm a postdoc at Arizona State University, and I'm also IGRI's Associate Director. And now Mondam is probably going to start taking over, handling these seminars. Any other announcements about that we need to share? Anything on the?
No, I will.
Well,
I'll just make a plug for the IG book talk series we've got going on. So Christopher France and I published earlier this year a book called Institutional Grammar 2.0, Foundations and Applications for Institutional Analysis. And we're doing an 8-week book talk series. We meet every Thursday from 10 to 11:30 Eastern online. And so we're just going chapter by chapter through the book. So if you're interested in participating in that, let us know and we'll send you the registration link. But that's all.
That's wonderful. And I've participated in those book talks. They're super interesting. So I would encourage you to join. It's always good discussions. Okay, so today we are thrilled to welcome Lidia Juárez Pastor from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Lidia has a bachelor's in environmental science and is currently working under the guidance of Amine Gorbani on obtaining her master's in industrial ecology. She tells me that industrial ecology is a holistic program that incorporates sustainability and different assessment methods. During her time in the program, she developed an interest in social science research for her thesis, and that's why she's now working with Amina on institutional analysis on the topic of these informal waste sector in India. So Lidia really enjoys talking trash, I guess, and is interested in everything that surrounds waste and waste management. So we're really looking forward to hearing more about her work. Please join me in welcoming Lidia.
Thank you. Should I start sharing?
Yes.
I guess you can see my screen and I hope you can hear me properly. So hello
All
everyone.
good.
Thank you for having me in this session of the seminar. I know some of your faces already from looking at previous editions, so I'm happy to be here. Together with Amine, I will be discussing about the integration of the informal waste sector in Chennai, India, from an institutional network perspective. So this is my work, or the work of my master's thesis, for which Amine has been my main supervisor. So first of all, I think there's a bit of noise outside of my house, sorry about that. First of all, we will be talking about the Indian context of the informal waste sector, specifically in the city of Chennai, which is located in the south of the country. The informal waste sector is defined as characterized by small-scale, labor-intensive, largely unregulated and unregistered, low-technology manufacturing or provision of services, in which workers do not pay taxes, have no trading license, and are not included in social welfare schemes. For the case of waste management in Chennai, it is the informal waste sector that enables recycling, since the formal waste system, which consists of the municipality and private companies, is mostly about collection of mixed waste that is largely or entirely landfill in the two dam sites of the city. The informal waste sector is actually a supply chain made up of 4 types of actors that interact by buying and selling recyclables. They only deal with recyclables, given that it's these materials that have a value in the market and they can gain money from. The chain starts by the waste pickers and itinerant buyers. The waste pickers extract recyclables from landfills, roadside bins, litter in the streets. while the itinerant buyers go house by house asking for recyclables to the citizens. Then these two sell what they have gathered to the next level, which is the small aggregators. These aggregators have small storage spaces in their shops, and they usually deal with various types of materials. When they have gathered enough volume, they sell it to the next level of aggregators, the large aggregators, and these ones have, as you can tell by the name, larger storage spaces, and they usually specialize in one type of material. Again, when they gather enough volume, they sell it to the next level of actors, which is the processors. These ones are the ones that that do the actual processing or recycling of waste into secondary raw materials that can be sold back to the industry, closing the loop. These actors are not only different in the roles they play in the chain, but they also differ in their socioeconomic condition. For example, waste pickers belong to marginalized communities and the lowest caste, most of the cases, and suffer chronic poverty. And unlike the other actors in the chain, they work in hazardous conditions. So what does polycentricity look like in the integration of informal waste sector? The social waste management is regulated by the national rules of 2016. In these rules, the informal waste sector was legally recognized and its integration mandated. These rules are then passed down to the local level through the municipal bylaws for its implementation. But the question is, has there been any or actual progress in this implementation? In other words, or understanding the formal institutions are as policies, bylaws, and regulations has their are the formal institutions put in practice? This comes down to the issue of rules in form versus rules in use. The question is, the rules in form, in the policy, in the paper, are they practiced by society? So to answer this, the research question that I set for my thesis is, how does the structure of the institutional network of the waste system influence the integration of the informal waste sector? To answer this, we need to learn about what the formal institutions are, what the informal institutions are, and especially how the two of them relate to each other. And it's good to know that informal institution means social norms and cultural practice, and it doesn't have the same meaning as informality in terms of the waste sector. So simply, the goal was to visualize institutional complexity, more specifically to assess the institutional interdependencies of the waste sector in Chennai for the integration of the informal waste sector. To answer this, or to learn about this, we need to comparatively analyze top level and bottom level institutions, that is, policies against people's behaviors, provided that for a policy to be effective, it needs to consider and understand what guides human behavior. So the method we used is the institutional network analysis. It has been presented in these seminars before, so I will shortly describe it and especially present some challenges I faced when I was using it, or my experience with it. So this method combines the institutional grammar, the institutional analysis and development framework, as well as social network analysis. The data is collected by means of desk research and semi-structured interviews. I interviewed actors from government bodies, experts, private sector, NGOs, and waste pickers of organizations. And I asked them about topics such as the persisting barriers for integration, the rules and guidelines that apply to this topic, potential measures, implementation status, or decision-making processes. Once we have the data, it needs to be coded and clustered and we do so by using the IAD framework to define the action situations. From this, the institutional grammar is used to formalize institutions using the Abdico syntax. And lastly, with the identified institutions, we draw the diagrams, which are the result of the method. So a bit of my experience using this method for the data clustering, defining action situations provides units of analysis that is the understanding of the information and how it connects together. So it was very helpful. However, in my case, it was not straightforward to choose. I wanted to cover, of course, all the system, to study the whole system, but it was too many aspects to cover. So I was asking myself what parts of the system should be looked at more closely to provide the most useful insights possible. So the plan A was to take the steps of any waste management process. So that is waste generation, waste collection, transportation, processing and disposal. Sadly, this was not useful for looking at informality nor the barriers for integration. So ideally, I wanted to define them before data collection so that I could design the interviews accordingly and inquire the interviewees about the things that I thought required more attention. But as I say, it wasn't successful. For some of the action situations that I defined, I had a lot of data, a lot of information, but for the others, it was barely nothing useful. So I had to take a plan B. And after data collection, actually, once I had all the data from the interview, I defined the new action situations. And they are basically about the interaction between the informal waste sector and the rest of the system. For example, the formal waste system or sector, society, market, supply chain itself, as well as policy agenda. In hindsight, I believe that it would have been more promising or helpful to look into the policy making itself, given the results that I obtained, that you will see in a bit. So the third step of the method, which is the formalizing institutions, I use the IGRI 1.0. And as you probably know, to extract institutions from formal documents, it's easier than from interviews, since there are guidelines that can be followed. And also in my case, there was much less content to analyze. It was basically the national rules for solid waste management. And the municipal bylaws were basically the same information and even the same wording at some point, at some times. However, for the case of the interviews, there are no guidelines that can be followed, just recommendations. And the latest recommendation that I was aware of was to take every sentence as a unit of analysis. And this, for me, wasn't useful because it was too time consuming, even though I think I didn't have that many interviewees or that much information. Going sentence by sentence takes a lot of time. And I started to think that all my sentences were institutions. So it's more difficult to discern what is useful and what is not. So instead, I realized I was looking at the concept behind the words, actually at the level of the paragraphs. But this, of course, means that it's highly dependent on interpretation, on my own interpretation. Is what I'm understanding what the interviewee meant. But yeah, this is a problem that comes up when using this kind of methods, as we know. Also, since my time was limited during the research and during the interviews, I had to choose whether to ask for confirmation of information that I already had gained, or to further expand my knowledge or to solve doubts. So I saw myself asking, can it be assumed to be an institution if something is mentioned by only one person? Is this an institution, or is it actually an opinion of this person? Because I cannot be asking the same things to everyone. That was not useful. And similarly, I had the question that in this case that someone is sharing the information, and I don't know if it's an opinion or an institution. In the event that it was an institution, is it representative of the entire society, or is it just of a given group? For example, the experts that have a certain information, but it's not practiced by the whole society, for example. And lastly, the last step of the method is the drawing of the institutional networks, so the visualization of the method. This visualization is intended for the IG 2.0, but as I said, I was using IG 1.0. So for me, I didn't differ or distinguish between types of conditions. So I was using the attributes, conditions, objects, and then the types of institutional statements. So in green, you can see what it would be the rules. In orange, the norms, and in blue, without the deontics, would be the strategies, the shared strategies. And this would be the representation of the sanction. In my case, I only had one, so it wasn't really appearing that much. So the results are like this. I got 7 of these diagrams. The institutions are connected by the dashed lines, which means that one institution activates the next one. And the black stars represent institutional misalignments or issues. And I will not show the 7 diagrams, but I will show in a more detail a couple of them. So the action situations that I chose were 7, as I said. Firstly, the informal waste supply chain. This one was mostly about the relationships between the actors, the types of actors, and the nature of these relationships. The second is about the market and the informal waste sector, so mostly about the pricing mechanisms in this sector. Then the interaction between informal and formal waste sector, so between waste pickers and either municipality or private companies. The fourth one, since caste is such a strong influence in the country, I wanted to explore the relationship between the informal waste sector and waste pickers, since they belong to the lowest caste, and the society. And then the solid waste management agenda 1 and 2, the one is about the national level, and the second one about the state and local level. Lastly, the obligations for the municipality in terms of the integration of the informal waste sector. So the institutional misalignments allow for identifying what's not working, let's say, in the system. This happens when 2 institutional statements share the same attribute, condition, and aim or object. In my case, it was mostly that they differed in the aim and they shared the same object. Also, I found that in my diagrams, there were misalignments that weren't strictly like this. So I had misalignments where 2 institutional statements also differed in the condition, which maybe means that it's not a big issue, but it certainly points out that something is not working in the system, like in this case. So this could be read as the municipality must establish waste pickers integration, however they deem appropriate. But in practice, the municipality is not discussing waste pickers integration in municipal bylaws formulation. So in my research, the misalignments were mostly between formal and informal institutions. I think, like, I don't know, except one or two, it was all of them an issue of rules in form not being in use, except for some being a norm conflicting with a routine. These misalignments clearly show where the formal institutions are not being complied with in the system. For example, here, the municipality by law must ensure waste pickers integration in solid waste management services. And in the case of Chennai, half of the city, the service of solid waste management is carried out by a private company. So the municipality tenders out this service. So on the left part of the screen, the contractor that gains this tender must comply with the tender clause that they have to integrate waste pickers by employing them in the solid waste management services privately, but this is not being done. At the same time, for the part of the city that the municipality takes care of the solid waste management services, the municipality is not employing waste pickers either for these services, even though they must do so by law. Another side of the method is the network metrics. They add a quantitative dimension to the method, to the research, and they consist of the centrality, embeddedness, density, and institutional conformance index, and shed light into what actors are most central, the importance of objects, how connected institutions are, and if there are concerns of conformance in a given diagram. So the results, I found out during the research that what they called in their national rules, they named the integration for the informal waste sector, but they actually intended this integration just for waste pickers. The policymakers considered that aggregators and processors being informal was okay, but the waste pickers being informal was a problem because of their vulnerability and the socioeconomic situation. So that's why they created these rules to protect them. To understand the results, I have to go back to the concept of policy cycle and its 5 stages: agenda setting, policy formulation, decision making, policy implementation, and policy evaluation. So the first insight, is that the municipality is the main bottleneck, given the high number of misalignments associated with it and the high centrality it has in the diagrams. What the municipality does do or does not do is the ultimate determinant for the integration of the informal waste pickers. And this comes down to the rules in form, rules in use. We saw exactly which rules in form were not practiced. And we saw that the conformance, actually, we expected that it was in the stage of policy implementation, that the municipality was just not implementing the policy at the local level. But I found that the problem comes earlier in the process, so in the agenda setting and policy formulation, given that the municipality does not consider this issue a priority, and it doesn't discuss it during the policy formulation, so the municipal bylaws. The second finding is at a higher level. We found that there is a gap or disagreement between policy levels. The policymakers at high level agree on the need to achieve this integration, and they consider it a priority. But at the local level, the grassroots level, they don't consider it as a priority, and they disregard it. And this pinpoints that the barriers are at different stages for low and high level policy making. Again, for local policy making, it would be at the agenda setting and policy formulation, while for the high policy making, it seems to be rather at the enforcing level of the policy. So here it's the first finding, but in the diagram form. We see the black star, the first one, that the municipality is not discussing waste speakers integration in municipal bylaws formulation. And we also see that at the state level, they should be monitoring the implementation by the municipality, but they are not monitoring. So there is also an issue at the state level. Other findings that were interesting was about the interaction between informal waste sector and society. As I said, I wanted to look at the caste and its influence in this issue. And at the bottom part of the diagram, I hope that you can see it. Because of this caste influence, the waste pickers cannot go house to house or to private houses asking for recyclables. If people are, because of the caste, they are perceived to be dirty and poor and so on. So they are not allowed to do this. And on the other hand, waste aggregators or itinerant buyers, because they are not from the lowest caste, they are allowed to go house to house. So in this way, the caste influence shapes the supply chain. And then on the right top part, you see that I wanted to say, on the left top part, there is an institutional statement that says that NGOs are not addressing caste stigmatization. And in general, I found that caste stigma is not being addressed explicitly by any party in the system, so it's invisible. However, it seems to be a present influence that should be addressed. Secondly, other findings, these people, the waste pickers, again, they belong to the lowest caste, and in most cases, they do not even have an identity proof. They don't have identity cards, so they don't exist to the Indian government or to Indian institutions in terms of organizations. Also, because they do not have these ID cards, they cannot access any basic social security schemes or government benefits, such as health services or loans or rations. So they remain in the most vulnerable position. And because of this, the municipality must provide ID cards as per the rules 2016 to at least provide waste pickers with this social protection. However, again, this is not happening. The municipality is not giving out ID cards. So for policy recommendations, I gave to the 3 levels of policy in India: national, state, and local. In bold, I gave policy recommendations that should be implemented immediately. To understand the first one, the survection is a national competition for states and cities in which they compete for or in terms of solid waste management performance. For example, the states or cities that perform the best, according to some indicators, they perform better in this competition, and then they gain more fundings and so on. So this is incentivizing cities and states to improve their solid waste management practices, for example, for source separation or recycling. But in terms of the integration of the informal waste sector, even though they should be looking at this, no one is checking whether cities or states are working on this. So in order to improve the enforcement and incentivization of this integration, I recommended that in this competition in survection, they should be more strict about whether cities and states are working on this or not. Secondly, that waste pickers integration should be looked at as a social inclusion, not only integration in the solid waste management system, but socio-economically, that they are included in communities and they are not suffering poverty. They get out of poverty. Because right now, when a waste picker gets hired by a formal party, they perceive they earn the minimum wage, which is not enough. It's very low at the moment, and it's not enough to live by. So sometimes waste pickers, when they become formalized and they are earning the minimum wage, sometimes they go back to informality because they were earning more money informally than formally. For the state, I recommend that the minimum wage is increased to the national recommendation. At the moment, every state sets the minimum wage for its state, and the national at the national level, it's recommended to raise it every year, but the states are not keeping up with this raise, so it remains very low at the moment, and this could be done immediately. And of course, for the longer term, waste pickers should be invited to policy making if what they want to do is understand their needs and help them. So they should be invited to policy making. At the local level, regarding the last slide that we saw, I recommend that the municipality immediately registers waste pickers and gives them ID cards so they can at least be eligible for the health services and social security schemes that I mentioned. And lastly, regarding the inaction by the municipality, it's good to remind them that the integration of waste pickers is, even though if it's not a priority for them, it's in the law, so they must comply with it. So finally, as conclusions, with this research, we were able to pinpoint exactly where institutions in form were not aligned with institutions in use. Formal institutions that they dictate integration of waste pickers because it was a decision of national policymakers. And there are rules in form that are not in use, as we saw, mandated by the National Solid Waste Management Policy, but not carried out at the local level by the municipality. The main bottleneck is the municipality of Chennai for the integration of waste pickers in the city. The institutional issues at the stages of we learned that they are at the stages of agenda setting and policy formulation. At the local level. So not only about implementation, they should be thinking also to how to fix these issues at the agenda setting and policy formulation. And lastly, that there is a disagreement between who creates the policy and who implements it. So between the national policymakers and the local policymakers. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward for the questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Such an interesting presentation. Do we have any questions for Lydia?
I could go.
Go ahead.
Lydia, wonderful presentation. This looks like a lot of work you've done, so kudos to that. I just have a quick question. If you could refresh my memory, I might have lost it in your presentation, but you said that you did incorporate information from the interviews when mapping these networks, or is it just solely based on the formal documents?
Sorry, I did incorporate the data from the interviews. It was actually mostly from the interviews because, as I said, the ones from the formal documents were very few in comparison. They weren't that many.
Gotcha. Thank you. And is it possible to see, for instance, for a given linkage in the diagrams, whether that linkage originated on data from the interview or from the formal document? Is it just the interviews are the strategies and then the rest is just rules and norms? Is that correct?
Yeah, at the moment, you cannot see it from the diagrams. It is usually the case that when it's a rule, it was coming from the formal documents, but not always. And for the case of norms and shared strategies, it was always from the interviews in my case.
Okay. Because I'm thinking that, maybe that could be a good way, if you're thinking about submitting this as a paper somewhere, it would be a good thing to clarify or to, in the text of the paper, the sources of the data and which linkage comes from. Maybe, I don't know if you can signal it in the diagrams via different colors, or say these linkages of this color comes explicitly from the rule documents and linkages with these colors come from the interview. Because I think that could help facilitate in a visual manner this issues that then you talk about when you talk about misalignments and things like that, which I think not still very clear on that. But anyway, just a suggestion there. And then could you give us more information on how you distinguished the different stages of the policy process in those diagrams? Because that to me was not, I think I lost you there.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable that you were lost because the...
No, my attention span is horrible, so
no.
on me, so.
I mean that, as I was saying at first, the action situations, I defined them in a way that I wanted to cover the whole system. And then once I had the results and I was interpreting them, I realized that it would have been more insightful to choose the action situations with these stages of policy making. So I was using the stages of policy making as a way to interpret the results, not as a structure in the data. I don't know if that clarifies.
Yeah, that helps. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No, I actually wanted to pick up oh, sorry, Evan, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So if you want to ask your question first, Ute.
No, go ahead, Evan.
Okay.
I can go after you.
Okay, great. Lydia, thank you. This was a fascinating work you've done. I guess I have many questions just because you covered a lot. But one was this just the network metrics. You mentioned you ran these network metrics, centrality, embeddedness. How did that help? One, how did those metrics help you interpret the results and where the misalignments were? And then also, I'm not familiar with the institutional conformance network, institutional conformance index measurement. I was wondering if you could explain what that was.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your question. The first one, it was very insightful. The fact that I was looking at the metrics when it came to see what the most central actor was. Because in the beginning, when I was looking at the diagrams, I could see the misalignments and the issues, but I couldn't see the centrality that the municipality had on the topic, especially how many misalignments were associated with this actor. So I would say that that was the most helpful element of using the metrics. And then the institutional conformance index, it's about when maybe Amine wants to explain it. I will try. When an institutional statement is not being complied with. So in that, every time it's not complied with, you have a star. You count that as a conformance issue. Maybe Amine
That
probably can
makes
explain it better.
Yeah, so
makes
it's
sense.
I'll post the paper on the chat box because that explains everything. But the idea is that by identifying places where there are multiple institutions addressing the same topic, you can kind of with a number. Yeah, I mean there's like a metric for it, the calculation. But you see, with a number, the higher it is, the more misalignment issues that you would have or something like that. Because I also don't remember how I defined it. Sorry, it's ages ago. But I'll post the paper because I think that would clarify everything.
Thank you. Can I ask just one follow-up question? Within the municipality, were you able to dig deeper and see if there were problems with the siloing? Municipality is a big actor, but there are many different departments, many different sub-departments that maybe don't interact or don't jointly have the same aims. Did you have any sense from your work of where so many misalignments were coming from with the municipality?
Yeah. Well, sadly, I couldn't speak to that many policymakers or people working from the municipality. So yeah, I think the research lacks a bit on that side. But then I was talking to someone that was working with an NGO a few years ago. And in this NGO, they started a project collaboration with the municipality to issue the ID cards to the waste pickers. So in 2017 or something, they actually managed to get them to work on this. And then after the first session of this issuing ID cards, unilaterally the municipality stopped the project. So, and they didn't give any explanation. So what these NGO people thought is that within the municipality there were vested interests in advancing with this integration, even though they didn't know exactly what they were or which part of the municipality was objecting to this. And I didn't get to this point either with my research, sadly. But yeah, I think it would be very interesting to look into this with more detail.
Anyone else? Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the caste issues because you mentioned NGOs were not addressing class stigma. And as you were giving your presentation, I was wondering about how embedded that is in the background considerations, even at the municipal level. The view of I understand that most of these informal waste pickers are probably lower caste, right?
Mm.
And so the fact that they would even be considered in legislation, I think is probably a big step forward. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with that, but I wanted to ask you about that and see how do you think it's possible, given the societal context and structure, to overcome those caste issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
I think, sorry.
sorry, I just wanted to say, and I realized that necessarily wasn't the focus of your research, but I was just curious.
Yeah, no, it wasn't, but I was also very curious about this because I understand, or I believe it must be the underlying cause of many other things not happening. Now I went back. Can you repeat the question?
I probably wasn't that specific. How do you think, is it possible, do you think, to overcome these caste issues? I think they're trying by incorporating them in the national legislation and putting in wages. And I mean, so the formal rule structure seems to be there, but you say that the disconnect happens at the municipal level. And I'm wondering how much caste considerations are driving the lack of interest at the municipal level. And I'm not sure that that's something that would come out in your interviews, if there's a way to do that, or if you think that's useful.
Mm-hmm.
Is that clear?
Yeah. I don't know. For the municipal level, it seemed to be that sometimes they have so many duties that they have to do that doing the integration of the lower caste people are not in the top list. Other times that they have, I don't know, other interests, for example, in this case, that they might prefer to close a deal with a private company because that gives them profit or money, rather than putting effort into the integration itself. And for the caste, I don't think it's that explicit at the municipal level, but my feeling is that it is the cause of that the caste stigma is the cause of not acting on it. I don't know if it makes any sense or if I answered to your question.
No, you answered it. And it's also curious that the NGOs are not even addressing it. That's even sadder.
That was one of the NGOs actually that said that, because he told me that the rest of, or most of the NGOs are actually run by people from the high caste or medium high caste, or high caste. So most of the times they are either not aware or of the system, the caste system, or they are not interested in talking about it.
Interesting. Nick, I'm sorry, Nick has a question. He has some audio issues, so I'm just going to read it out of chat. He noted that you had a list of action situations that you identified as part of the policy environment and institutional network. And he says he may have missed this due to his audio issues, but would be interested to hear how you identified these action situations. Were they already differentiated by different policies or agencies, or did you derive them through some other means?
The action situations, I defined them after I had gathered all the data from the interviews. When I was making sense of that data, I started to see some patterns, or that some main topics or some topics were coming up consistently. And I started to group that information. So it was actually backtracking that I was doing. And in the beginning, it wasn't following any other process or any stages or anything. So I was actually recognizing, okay, this information is here, and it means that it's the interaction between the informal waste sector and this other part of the system. So in that sense, it was a bit, I don't know, yeah, arbitrary.
You said you had trouble identifying action situations, right?
Can I add to this maybe?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Lydia's case was quite interesting in the sense that so far our cases were relatively easy in the sense that we had this like cycle of flood risk management or I don't know, climate change adaptation. So there are these theoretical framings that help us identify the action situations. And for Lydia, we couldn't really find a specific framework that helps us classify the steps in the process. But in the end, as Lydia said herself, it was really interesting. It would have been really interesting to actually use the stages of policymaking for this particular case. But it's really, you know, a recursive process, and you go back and forth. And defining action situations is indeed one of the difficult parts of doing this sort of analysis.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I actually didn't say it explicitly, but the problem that because I did this approach, it was because there was no established integration process that with the defined steps. So I had to come up with something else. And that's why I took this option.
It's always difficult when you're dealing with informal institutions. It's not as straightforward as with formal ones. So those challenges are real, and it's good that you point them out. And I think it's really interesting that you, and I think it's something that should be done more often in research, to point out where the shortcomings are, where you run into difficulties applying a particular method. So yeah, anybody else have any questions for Lydia before I keep blabbing? Okay, you had mentioned what is an institutional statement in informal rules, right? And so I don't actually have an answer. I just have an experience to share that, and whether an institution, whether it takes more than one person to have the same perception for it to be an institution. So an institutional statement in informal rules, I found in my own coding, is usually you have to group statements together in an interview in order to deduce some kind of an understanding of what they think this particular aspect of an institution is. And so you then just kind of translate that into an institutional statement based on what people say. And what my understanding is, that means that this is the way they perceive this particular aspect of a rule. Now, it really becomes a rules in use when you have more people that have the same perceptions. And that's where it gets interesting. Do people perceive this particular aspect of the formal rules in a similar way, or is it totally different from person to person? So I don't know if that helps answer your question or gives you a different perspective on it. I just thought I'd share that. So an institutional statement can be whatever somebody's individual perception is. Whether that becomes a rules in use or a norm across the society depends on whether more people agree on that.
So together with my other student, we actually ran a questionnaire just to identify these things that you're saying, Ute, because, you know, like with a questionnaire, even if you get 100 people responding, maybe it's not statistically valid, but it actually gives you a better overview of what the shared strategies are among other people than just interviewing five individuals, for example. So I think we should bring in questionnaires eventually into identifying institutions, informal ones.
Yeah, that's kind of what Ostrom said. She thought that shared strategies evolve into rules, which is something that I can see in your research. And my research was totally not different, because at the international level, the rules take precedent over the perceptions of them. So I didn't see necessarily an evolution of shared strategies into rules, more the opposite. The rules trying to impose shared strategies, but yeah. So anyways, really interesting discussions. Does anybody have any more questions for Lidia? Okay, thank you so much for sharing this interesting work. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope the feedback was useful to you, and I know I learned a lot. So thank you for that.
for having me.
And that concludes today's research seminar. We're going to meet again November 1st. And at that time, we'll be hosting Mazahar Kianapur from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And he'll be talking about the institutional design of EU cyber incidents and crisis response regulations as a complex public good. So I hope to see you then. Have a good day or evening. Thanks, Amine. Thanks,
Thank
Lidia.
you. Thank you for having us. You're welcome.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.